Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. We have the next panel ready and our panelists online. We have Bikrama Daulat Singh, who would be the moderator for the session. He's also the co-managing director at Central Square Foundation. We have Helen Crichton from Samagra Governance, where she leads the Samagra Haryana engagement and also the suction program. We also have Ankur Bansal, who is the co-founder of Samagra Governance and has been instrumental in driving Samagra's journey in terms of growth of the organization as well as the impact it's making. And finally, we have Anurag Kundu, who is the member of Education Task Force as well as a member of the Child Rights at Government of Delhi NCT. So I'm going to go ahead, give the conversation to Bikrama, who would start the panel.
Thank you. Want to welcome everyone to this session, Moment of Reckoning, Government School Systems in India. My name is Bikrama Daulat Singh. I'm the co-managing director of Central Square Foundation. The discussion today will really focus around states' responses to the COVID-19 crisis and how we're really working to ensure that children continue to learn from home. We've got a great panel with us today, and in this panel we have leaders and partners who have been critical to ensuring states are equipped to provide quality education across 6 states. Ritika introduced the panel, but I just wanted to again just call out all the key panelists we have today. We have Anurag Kundu, who actually today is a secretary rank officer, and as member of Delhi Commission for Protection of Child Rights, Government of Delhi. Welcome, Anurag. Helen is actually is from Samagra, as Ritika mentioned. Helen actually is working on Saksham Haryana, which is managing the Saksham Haryana program, which is a statewide education transformation program. And incidentally, Helen is also had a career in the UK civil service before she took a sabbatical to join Samagra here in India. Welcome, Helen. We then have Ankur, who's a co-founder of Samagra and has been at the forefront of bringing system-level change across several states, and he's really going to bring in his experience supporting the state of Himachal today. And then finally, we have Shoikat, who works with BCG and has been instrumental in devising and leading school improvement programs across several Saathi states. So wanted to divide this session into two parts. First, wanted to actually hear from Anurag and Helen on how Delhi and Haryana respectively are responding to the COVID crisis to minimize the impact on learning and for children. And then we will actually segue and double down more on digital learning, and then hear from Ankur and Shoikat on how these states are actually using digital technology and edtech to offer a suite of learning pathways for children. I'll request each panelist to take about 7-8 minutes each, and then we'll actually open up to Q&A. So with that, I would like to turn to Anurag. And Anurag, Delhi School Education Reform Initiative is now a global case study. And I would love to, could you please talk to how the Delhi government is now responding to the COVID crisis? And, how is it looking at the coming academic year as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Vikrama. Good morning to everyone. Let me take a step back. And my position would be that the children are indeed learning. Now, what they're learning may not be algebra as is taught in the schools. Am I audible? Just to give a check?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Now, children may not be learning algebra, but they're definitely learning. Now, we don't know what they're learning. So to begin with, and before I come to how the Delhi government is responding, one of the things that we are going to do, and hopefully we'll launch it in 2 or 3 days from today, we are launching a very sort of large sample survey involving students who are studying in private schools, municipal schools, Delhi government schools, to understand and have a sneak peek into what are the children doing whole day, what are the sort of activities they're engaged in, what are they thinking, what do they really want to do when the lockdown is lifted, what are they learning, who are the people they're interacting with, what are they eating, what's keeping them awake at night. And these are sort of the questions. It's like peeking into the homes of these children and trying to understand and make sense of what they're going through and what they're thinking and what they're learning in the process. And we want to use the findings or the insights from the survey to plan way forward. Because honestly, anything that I'm going to say and anything most of us are going to say is somewhat rooted in evidence and our understanding, but somewhat rooted in conjectures, because it's unprecedented and none of us in a lifetime has seen a situation like this. So we want to understand a little more rigorous scale, what is it that is really happening inside the homes of our children. Having said that, like all other states have done some sincere efforts in order to bridge up the gap of the learning that the children must be experiencing right now, we are doing largely 3 things. And our principle was twofold. One, how do we use least infrastructure that may not be available to the kind of students who come to municipal or government schools? So that's the first principle, using the least amount of resources. The second principle that we had when we were designing activities was that, hey, algebra can be learned at a later date as well. So we need not drill down on certain academic concepts. What we need to focus on is building certain skill sets in our children that which we can leverage when they show up at a school at a later date. Now, what do I mean when I say certain skill sets and not necessarily concepts of algebra through online teaching? And let me first come to the channel. So we've largely drilled down on 3 channels. One is the SMS, because even those who do not have smartphones, and almost 40% of our children's parents do not have a smartphone, as a preliminary survey we conducted almost 20 days ago. So 40% do not have a smartphone. Now, data pack can still be reimbursed by the government, but then there's a certain degree of familiarity or the lack of it in order to use smartphone that can become a hindrance. So first is an SMS-based intervention. Every child, depending on their grade, gets an activity or an SMS of the day, which are certain activities for specific days, depending on the grade. Then there is a language acquisition and mindfulness-based activities that the children get through IVR. And the third is, which I'll speak later, for older children. And these activities are largely rooted in a single principle called what we call PCM, which is physical workout, cognitive workout, and mental workout. And all our activities have a component of social emotional angle to it. For example, like one of the activities, I think 7-10 days ago was sit with your grandparents or with one of the adults in the house and talk to them. Talk to them about the stories of their childhood and ask them different stories of the childhood. Now write down in 100 odd words in your notebook the favorite story, your favorite story from their childhood. Now, what are the skill set does it require for a child to develop or cultivate? One, it will compel the child to talk to the grandparents or adults in the house. So first, as the conversations happen, the family relationship improves. Two, it will expose the child to a very different version of history or very different version of time, which otherwise is hard for them to think. For example, one of the questions child might end up asking is, how did you really spend your time all when you had no phones or no TV? And that's a very different version of learning that they have. Three, they have to listen very carefully. Four, they have to process which of them is their favorite story. Five, they have to then summarize it in their head. Six, then they have to put it on paper in 100 words in the notebook. It's a series of skill sets that can be leveraged later for whatever we choose to do. Now, another activity, for example, could be sit with your parents, ask the different sources of expenditure for your house for the last 2 months, categorize them or organize that load of information the way you would like to, figure out what is an essential expenditure, what is a non-essential expenditure, and if you were to cut down expenditure on 3 areas, what would those 3 areas be? Once again, it's a huge set of skills that a child would need to develop in order to be able to answer this problem statement, which can then be leveraged later when the schools reopen. So our principle is, how do we get our children to focus on skill sets that are easy to leverage later rather than necessarily academic principles, which can be difficult through various versions of teaching depending on the infrastructure the children have access to. Now, sending SMS or sending an IVR is the easiest bit actually. How do we ensure that children are actually conducting these activities? So one of the first thing that we did was we raised the stakes for everyone. How we raise the stakes? The first internal assessments were supposed to happen. Now, since no part of the syllabus has been covered, the internal assessments cannot take place. But what we said was the series of activities that children are getting over the SMS and the IVR, the assignments that they do will form the part of the first internal assessments. Now, nothing works with Indian parents more than the marks for the children. So the moment you raise the stakes and say, oh, it's linked to the marks for your children, the stakes certainly become higher. Second thing that we've done was there was an appeal sent by the Deputy Chief Minister, also the Minister of Education, to all the parents, explaining to them the nature of our intervention and what we expect from them and how we intend to support them in the process. Third, all teachers have called all of the children's parents, explaining activities to them, explaining what the agenda is, explaining why we are doing this and how it benefits the children. And then every day, every teacher calls 5 to 10 students as a follow-up, saying, hi Sumit, good morning. Did you check today's activity? Oh, you did not, it's okay. Why don't you check and I'll give you a call 1 hour later. What that does is it significantly improves the likelihood of child actually doing that activity. It's not just sending an SMS, it's following up and ensuring through someone that the child is already familiar with that the activity does happen indeed. And if there's a question the child has, that is responded to as well. So there are a series of interventions that we have made in order for us to be able to bridge some learning gap that the children would be having right now. Third thing that we tried has not succeeded yet is using TV actually, because by and large TV is there in everyone's home, does not require additional infrastructure at all. Children, we could have pre-scheduled everything, teachers could have shown up on TV, children could have learned, and then there could have been a follow-up mechanism with the teachers over call or WhatsApp or whatever the children and the teacher might evolve for themselves. That has not worked out because Government of India has not given us approval despite us submitting proposals more than 30 days ago. That has not worked out. That was another bit that we had really sort of put our high hopes on. And lastly, that what we have done, particularly for class 12th, Now, sometimes stars align interestingly. Last year, as part of the scholarship to students who scored 80% plus marks, instead of giving out cash, we had given out tablets to these children. Now, a year ago, we clearly could not have seen this pandemic coming, but the decision, a year-old decision where we decided to give away tablets to students is now proving pretty useful. So a lot of our students from class 12th actually have a tab. So using those tabs, we have partnered with various organizations, and our teachers take sessions, standard online teaching that we keep hearing about, no, significantly not different, just doing it, and then how we follow up on those online teaching that happens is the area actually where the implementation becomes the key. So these are sort of some things that we have focused on, focusing on skill sets. If I were to summarize, focusing on skill sets, looking into the mental well-being and family as a unit, where we say all our activities must be rooted in a way that children need not do it alone. They must sit with a family member, have a conversation, and then the takeaways be from that conversation that happens inside a family. And lastly, least infrastructure possible, so that all children, or at least maximum children, have access to those activities, and follow up, whatever gets followed up actually gets done. And more often than not, nobody can be more successful in convincing the other person than the teacher of the child, of your own children. So those are sort of key principles that we have in order to bridge the learning gap that there is because of the pandemic.
No, thanks so much, Anurag. And I think it's very unique the way you sort of, the Delhi government is looking just beyond the academic competencies and looking in a bit more holistic manner. And also, I think your call out on giving out devices to the senior students, I think if that can be sort of leveraged well, I think that can also be a model for other states. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of further questions on this, which we take at the end. So now I wanted to segue and move to Helen. And Helen, Saksham Haryana has been a sort of a key sort of learning improvement program. And of course, I can imagine a lot of the design of that program now is, has completely got disrupted by COVID. How is the government of Haryana looking at continued learning at home? What are some of the strategies you're deploying? What are some of the channels? And what has been the response around the same?
So just leading on from what Anurag was saying, I completely agree with everything that he was saying about lockdown learning being really complicated, and what you were saying about this disrupting previous plans. This learning at home is a whole new way of thinking about learning. Children are on their own with parents who never expected that they would have to step into a teacher's shoes, even partially, let alone fully, or to the extent that people are looking to them now. And for policymakers, for educators, for teachers, we are on the outside peeking into a place which is a domestic space, a place where we have less reach, less visibility. And so in these circumstances, we can't expect learning to continue exactly as it was. But it's the start of a journey that we're at. There's still a lot that we don't know. There's still a lot to experiment with and try out. And so I think it's really useful to have this conversation today to see where we've got to in different states, to see what we can learn from others and see how we can kind of approach this collectively. In Haryana, just like in Delhi, the government has been very proactive and very serious about the need for home learning and the need to do some things serious in this space. And similarly, they've picked up a number of different channels to try and reach out to children in different ways. So one thing that has happened in Haryana that maybe hasn't happened or hasn't started yet in Delhi is TV channels. So Haryana was fortunate enough that even before lockdown, they had a program called EduSat. And EduSat was a program where they streamed videos via a satellite. They streamed educational videos to TVs in schools in the state. So there was already some infrastructure and some mechanisms around this in the state, and this has been adapted. And now these EduSat channels, there's 3 EduSat channels across different grades, these are being streamed to a variety of cable operators as well as DTH TV operators in the state. So no matter what TV company or network you're hooked up to through your TV, you should be able to access these EduSat channels. These EduSat channels are showing content for about 8 hours a day for different grades. So there's different hours when different grades subject is shown. And often what happens is there'll be 4 hours of content in the morning that gets repeated in the afternoon. So if you missed it or you want to watch it again, it's there. These videos are a range of different types of videos. Some of them are ones that the state already had, that they've made themselves, that SCRT has made. And some of them also come from external academic sources, for example, Pratham or the Tic-Tac Learn videos from CSF. So there's a range of things being shown through EduSat. So that's one big chunk of what's happened in Haryana. The other big chunk, and this is where, similar to what Anurag was saying about direct student-teacher interaction and motivation and follow-up is really important. So on that theme, the state's also launched a WhatsApp learning campaign to connect teachers and students to do homework, to share activities, to share videos each day through WhatsApp groups. So through the Sakshan Haryana programme, again, before any of this lockdown thing even happened, we actually already had a really good network of teacher WhatsApp groups. So all TGT, PGT, JBT teachers in the state are connected across a network of around 200 odd WhatsApp groups, district-wise. And so we use those to connect directly to teachers and to say to them, connect with your students, set up groups with your students. We'll share content that you can share with them. We'll share videos, worksheets, things that you can share with them every day. We'll share guidance for how you can best engage with them. But let's have a big campaign to connect students and teachers through WhatsApp. And so what's happening every day is we're seeing teachers having classes through WhatsApp, sharing videos, sharing homework, and then students taking pictures of their homework in many cases and sending them back to the teacher. And the teacher can mark them, tick or cross, using the WhatsApp feature where you can draw on pictures. We've seen teachers sharing audio notes, doing live classes in a few small cases, connecting in lots of different ways. So that's the kind of other side of this. Similarly also to in Delhi, after a few weeks of doing the WhatsApp campaign, many teachers were saying, not all of my students are on WhatsApp, they don't all have a smartphone. And so now SCRT and Pratham are working together to curate, similar to Delhi, these kind of SMS messages that teachers can also share, much more simple, much more basic activities. So again, these are kind of an extension to the WhatsApp campaign going into SMS activities as well. And I think all of these channels have been really helpful, but the thing that's been really interesting and I think stands out in Haryana for me is the extent to which at every level in the system we've seen great enthusiasm for this. So at the state level, PSSE has been very enthusiastic about home learning. The EM and the CM have both been on television talking about home learning and how important it is. I've been putting out press statements and things like that. Coming down to district levels and block levels, we've seen district level officers holding reviews via Zoom with their officials, monitoring these WhatsApp groups, calling parents to make sure they're watching these EduSat channels, running competitions for star students, for star teachers, recognising teachers for their efforts through press notes, through certificates. And then coming down to the teacher level, we've really seen teachers take to this WhatsApp campaign really proactively. So we're sharing content with them, but they're also making their own content, creating quizzes, sharing voice notes, holding ePTMs, doing all kinds of innovative things kind of by themselves and organically. And similarly, even down at student level, we've had a really good reception from students with the kind of pictures that we're seeing shared by teachers of students studying every day, sending positive messages on WhatsApp groups, nagging a teacher when it gets to 10 AM and they haven't shared the homework yet. Mom, where is it today? Please share. And so we've seen a really big kind of enthusiasm and excitement around it. I think there's a long way to go to see what the most effective way to do this is, what the most effective way of teaching is, and critically, how do you sustain that level of enthusiasm and that buy-in and momentum over a longer period? as it looks like schools might not open for a while. How do you keep that going and kind of build on it over time?
Thanks so much, Helen. And I think it seems that, it's some existing programs and initiatives are sort of getting repurposed, like you said, to meet this COVID challenge. And I think there are some questions while you were talking on, on reach, especially in the rural areas. And I think maybe at the end, I think this applies as much, I think, across all these states on, if actually COVID extends beyond the summer, how will we actually ensure that all of these, are reaching every child, regardless of their their challenges.
I think that's one of the major challenges, making sure that you can reach every child.
And I would love to hear from all the panelists maybe at the end. So I'd like to now turn to Ankur. And Ankur, the Education Minister of Himachal Pradesh, has actually launched this Samay 10 se 12 Har Din Pathshala, Har Din Bane Pathshala. It's a program. Basically, it's the first state government that is saying we're going to, learning from home is now the strategy under COVID. Could you talk about how EdTech and digital leverage to implement this program, and what has been again some of the engagement and reach around this? How is the state and district administration responded to it? Feedback loops being collected from parents directly on how they're engaging.
Thanks, Vikrama. So I think what Anurag and sort of Helen has mentioned, very, very similar in Himachal, that some of the systemic work which Himachal had seen over the last 3 years, I think that came in very handy, because no one in our schooling system thought education can be done without the textbook, because textbook is the base of whatever we study and everything. But in the last 3 years or something, now the machinery is mobilized to understand competency, which is not necessarily which comes through only the textbook, that there is a competency framework which exists, which tells students, which tells the teachers and everyone that these are the skills, these are the things which the student needs to learn, and you don't require textbook for that. That's the first thing which came in handy. The other late last year, we sort of started, because in our learning of systemic work, the one big realization which was coming is that we cannot leave the parents behind. At that time, we didn't think of something like we are living in today. But at that time was also the state focus was that we need to loop in the parents in the education of the child and everything. So state launched an initiative called e-Samvad, which is how do you regularly interact with the parents of government school. So they launched a very simple app where the teacher collects the phone number, and then regularly the parents get to know about the attendance of the student, various activities in the school level, the assessment data of the student 6 times in a year and everything. So we had a large base of phone numbers to connect back to the parents in a very quick around time period. Right? That's the third piece. The fourth piece was that in the work we were doing, all the 95% teacher were there on the centralized WhatsApp group. So there is a cascaded group of WhatsApp groups which are there. So they were there, and within 3-4 days. So our sense was, so the whole thing in systemic work was always the quality of education. And when this pandemic hit, we just realized that again, we'll have to redo the work, which the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan have sold in the last 15 years, which is the access to this. Now, if we only go to the digital way, then we'll lose out a lot of people because the people will not have the access. So there were 3 kind of people who were identified. One is the kind of parents who will have the smartphone. One is the kind of people who will not have the smartphone, but will have the basic phone. And third is a set of people who will not have the smartphone or who will not even have the phone. So there the strategy was that for the people who have the smartphone, use the models like WhatsApp, use the model like microsite and everything, so people can get access to it. The second piece was where people don't have the smartphone and everything, and people who don't have the phone itself. So there what we did was the state came forward with very unique ideas and everything. So what they did was the content which was getting digitally transmitted to through the smartphone, they put them in the text pieces. So they sort of translated all the text and everything, and they put the worksheet and everything. And the block officer and the cluster officers, they went sort of home to home to these districts like Lahore, Spiti, Kinnaur, few blocks of Chamba and everything, to ensure that the supply of material is there for those kids. At the same time, Himachal actually, within the lockdown only, they provided the textbook to each and every kid, like in a normal sort of a year. So people who are not having the access to the digital thing, textbook and all this worksheet and everything were provided to all the kids in a very timely manner. By 24th of I think 24th of April or something, every kid was provided the textbook also. So everyone has a base to refer to study and everything. Now in the strategy, there are 5 pillars to the strategy to this 10 se 12 Har Ghar Bare Pathshala program. And those five pillars are the awareness. First, you need to create awareness about this, led from the Chief Minister, led from the Education Minister. So Chief Minister daily in the press conference, evening, he talks about this program. What happened, what is the number of reach we have gotten, what is the innovation we have done and everything. So that's the first thing, where the local machinery have been mobilized, a lot of IVRSs have been done, SMSs have been done, advertisement have been done about the program. That's the awareness bit. So to get more and more people hooked into the program. The second was training for teachers, for block officers. This is just a new way of teaching. So within the first sort of a week, there were large Zoom call training which were conducted and everything, where 300, 400 people will participate at one point of time, and then they will do it at their block level and everything. So training was done for these things. The third is a collaboration. So collaboration with both the communities as well as with the partners. So state have partnered like Pratham, state have partnered like Tic Tac, which we got through CSF. Then we onboarded a new partner, which is an interesting thing, which I'll come to, is a Convigenius. How they helped us doing the assessment while the kids are away. So collaboration came in handy. And then the community, at the local level, the sarpanches and everyone, they really helped out, because a lot of kids who came from Nepal, who came from other places, they didn't have access to the technology. Sometimes we believe people will have. So sarpanches onboarded volunteers in their villages to make sure that for a couple of hours from 10 to 12, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., these kids sort of study in group of 4 kids. So the access can be provided. Fourth is data. Now, because this is happening through digital sort of a medium, we are getting a lot of data in terms of how many hits on your website, how many hits on a particular link, how many teachers are filling a daily form, how many transactions between the teacher and the student happen, how many meetings happen. So there's a lot of data which is flowing around. So how to make sense of this data to drive decision, empower the decentralization of data to the block level, to the teacher level. So they know what others are doing and where we are doing and where we can improve and all. And the last bit is innovation, and I'll come to that. So the whole idea was that we are doing a lot of top-down sort of a dissemination of content and everything, but we don't know whether we are bridging the learning gap or whether this learning gap, which we always thought through this program, we can arrest that decline and everything, whether that's happening or not. So we partner with the organization Convigenius, and I think you guys will hear about them later in the day. So they had a chatbot through their program, a WhatsApp chatbot. So you put a query, and someone on their back end, they have an army of people, they sort of reply to those queries and everything. So students feel that, our queries are getting addressed and all. So through them, we developed a WhatsApp chatbot through which assessment can be done. So there is a link, you click on that link, and then it just asks you from which district are you from which block you are from, which class do you study in. And then there is an automated on WhatsApp assessment starts. So there are pictures. So there is a sort of one picture will be how many fingers are these for a class 1 student, and there would be option 1, 2, 3, 4, and the right options will go through. So we started that pilot just to see whether that can be a new norm for doing assessment while kids are at home and all. So that we tried, and last week we tried. We didn't anticipate what will happen. We tried all the load testing and everything, but in 10 minutes we got 25,000 enrolled, 25,000 kids enrolled for this, which WhatsApp then blocked our number. They thought we are just spamming, but that's fine. So after a day or something, we sort of spoke to WhatsApp, just figure out what are the challenges we are facing. We everything too much, and now in the last 4-5 days, 90,000 kids have completed this assessment, and roughly we are seeing somewhere around 73-74% success rate. That tells you that whatever you are doing. So how the assessments are designed, every week, Monday to Friday, there will be a study, and Saturday, whatever you have learned in this week, you get assessed on that. So language and Hindi, 10 questions each for both the subject comes, and then you reply, and then you get this thing. And now we are automating these things. Where if kid has done 2 mistakes, then we send those 2 videos so they can learn what is the mistake they did. So we are trying to sort of map out those content question wise, so the feedback loop can be completed. Right now it's not completed, but we are hoping that probably in a week's time or 10 days time we should be able to sort of do. So I think these are some of the things we have been able to see. In terms of numbers, I think most people wants to know the numbers. So I think in Himachal, roughly somewhere between 65 to 70% kids are enrolled in these WhatsApp channels. There are roughly 30% kids who are being excluded, for which we are doing some sort of a offline mechanism right now. There is roughly 30%, roughly 25 to 30% who did the first assessment, and we are hoping that that number will go up and everything. So these are the things from Himachal. A tucked away state doesn't get talked about much, but trying their own stuff within their constraints and everything to just move the system forward.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ankur. And just wanted to call out 2-3 things that really stand out. I think one, the focus on awareness, and so leadership sort of calling out the importance of this, and so parents even are aware of a lot of these programs. I think second, the tracking of learning outcomes, and I saw a lot of questions around these as well coming up in the chat. How are we even seeing that? How are we even tracking that children are learning? And third, the focus on data. I think you at least this government of Himachal has some estimate of the reach of all these programs in cumulative. Thanks so much for sharing. Now I'd like to move to Shoikat, and Shoikat, BCG has been supporting reform in all the 3 Sathi states, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Odisha, and has helped design a digital program that is aligned to key competencies of each grade. So could you tell us about this program? How it's been rolled out? What has been the reach?
Sure, and thank you so much, Bikrama. Pleasure to hear everyone speaking, especially the experiences of some of the other states. BCG has been supporting Rajasthan as well as the 3 Niti Aayog states, as you said, along with our partners, PFEL. Now, firstly, these are very large states. Unlike, let's say, Delhi, Haryana, and Himachal, we're talking about states which cover 2 lakh schools, 2 crore students, also states with significantly lower income levels and availability of infrastructure. In the face of the COVID crisis, the states responded in a similar manner to what we've been hearing. First priority was to ensure accessibility to the MDM. So how do you scale up, use the teacher base that you have to ensure access to MDM. The second was ensuring the reach of printed material, like Ankur was referencing in Himachal. We had some troubles with printers because some printers were actually stuck in sort of red zone districts without paper availability, etc. But that was the second priority, making our printed material textbooks reach students. And the third was enabling access to digital education through a combination of massive WhatsApp cascades, WhatsApp-based assessment boards, like Ankur was saying, 3 to 4 hours of TV a day, as well as radio programs to reach out to those students who don't have access to smartphones, etc. Now, there were 5 fundamental premises to these efforts. The first was that there is a huge digital divide. This is a moral dilemma that has been discussed by everyone. And the answer that we came is that while we acknowledge the digital divide, we have used multiple channels, TV, radio, WhatsApp, etc., to reach out to as many people as possible. Secondly, that the interventions were aimed not just at students, but also at teachers. In fact, the teacher interventions were considered critical because it was an opportunity to use the lockdown time to ensure some level of professional development for teachers, which otherwise doesn't happen. Typically, summer training tends to be 8 to 10 days of the year, and the reality is that the quality of our government teachers is not at the levels that one would ideally want. So there was a focus also not just on students, but also on how do we take advantage of this time for teachers. The third premise was that it is not reasonable probably to expect new learning to take place through digital means at our disposal. Therefore, there was a strategy where we focused on remedial learning for lower grades, primarily through games, activities, animation, etc., and more academic activity which was at grade level, senior grades, especially for classes 11 and 12, where students are preparing for their boards. And so the type of content and the engagement strategy was differentiated for secondary grades from, let's say, primary grades for sure. Upper primary was a mix. And the fourth premise is that in many ways we were cognizant from the beginning this is a grand experiment. To quote Ankur, that some of this evidence, some of this was evidence, and some of this is in the realm of conjecture. And the pragmatic view that we took is that digital isn't an answer to everything, but it is an opportunity to learn about its impact and prepare for the future, which is going to be the digital future. And this leads to a fifth premise, where we decided that while addressing learning requirements during the COVID crisis was the immediate and transient goal, we had a very clear long-term and transformational goal, which was to scale up digital access in the long term and get teachers and students used to the concept of using digital content for every teaching over a long period. And that's the goal over the next 1 to 2 years, to use COVID as almost a catalyst for digital learning. The first step was to identify and put together a high quality content library. And it was immediately apparent that while there was a vast library of online content, most of it was eminently unsuitable for the government school segment that we're talking about. Not just the fact that a lot of it is not in Hindi and other local languages like Odia, which we struggled with in Odisha, but also that there was no single source actually which was really comprehensive in depth and scope. And therefore, our first step was to reach out to a large number of coalition partners, several of whom are on this panel, CSF, MSTF, Samagra, etc., and work was creating a library of highly sort of curated content, which was mapped to every single topic across the K-12 continuum. And this library, we believe, will continue to be a long-term resource going forward, not just in our states. It's been made open source, being leveraged by other states such as Haryana, Himachal as well. I won't go into the details of the implementation since I don't want to repeat what some of the other panelists have said, but sort of dive into the learnings. And there are 5 major learnings. One is, of course, that the digital divide is real. In most of our states, we have about 8% maybe of students actually learning on a daily basis. Now that's a key factor, 8 out of 100 students learning on a daily basis. But at the same time, in terms of numbers, that's 10 to 20 lakh students at least actually learning on a regular basis. The reality is that most students don't have access, but at the same time, we're seeing a lot of innovation. We're seeing low-income students actually access digital content and want to access digital content. Literally every picture I get is 5 students learn together, never one. So maybe it's not 8 lakh, maybe it's 4 lakh. I won't be able to answer that question. We are seeing innovation from teachers who actually go door to door with their phones and with their tabs and spending 20 minutes with different children in groups, teaching them. We are seeing programs where, while maintaining social distancing, halls are being used for large-scale access to radio programs to 20 students at a time. The most important thing here is the behavioral change, and that's the second learning. We're seeing behavioral change in students, low-income students using feature phones to access, using KIOS, etc., to access YouTube and digital content, and teachers for the first time saying, why did we wait for COVID to increase access to digital education? Why weren't we doing this before? Sort of realizing the power that digital education has in terms of their own digital literacy, the students' digital literacy, as well as in using this on in a regular basis for classes. The administration has taken this up in a big way as well. As Helen said, my personal opinion is that every district and block official realizing that a meeting can be on Zoom will save 2 hours per day for every district and block official going forward because of the amount of time that literally gets spent in traveling to meetings back and forth. The other major learning which follows from one of my initial premises, was that this was a grand experiment. And we looked at it as an experiment. This was an opportunity to understand the space and to do research into what works. Therefore, we spent a lot of time also collecting data from ground level surveys and interviews about learnings about usage. When do students use it? What time of the day do they watch it? Do they watch 2 videos? Do they watch 5 videos for 5 minutes, half an hour? Do they watch it in a staggered manner? Do they watch it together? The quality of the content itself. What do students at different grades prefer watching? Is it an animated video? Is it a teacher teaching? There's a huge difference between a local teacher teaching and a teacher from some other state teaching with an accent. What is the difference between content which is like notes with voiceover versus a blackboard, etc.? And this has really helped us begin to sort of understand insights about the usage of EdTech and digital content, which will hopefully help us, as I said, in the long term, which was our aim from the beginning. And lastly, one of the other things was that teacher professional development. We realized that teachers by themselves getting greater access to digital content throughout this entire COVID period, we've tried to ensure with partners like People, Teacher App, etc., that we scale up access to teacher professional development and use this as an opportunity, not just with digital content, but also through normal cascades, the same cascade that we follow for training, except a digital cascade this time, that we actually use this opportunity to train teachers on basic competencies, on tips and tricks on how to execute certain things in class. As for learning, I think that's the critical question. I will be honest. I won't be so bold as to say that we know learning is taking place. We've implemented similar solutions as what Ankur spoke about, the WhatsApp-based assessments. We don't have the results yet since it's just been launched in some of our states. But the question as to whether or not learning is happening, I think for me is still open in our states. For sure, what I do see is that engagement of teachers and students to support them through this crisis is happening. For sure, what I do see is that we have, like Anurag has done in Delhi, but to a lesser extent probably, integration of socio-emotional learning content into the programs has helped reach students, has helped reach teachers, and has helped create a certain amount of momentum in the state about the power of digital learning, and has for sure reached out to, as I said, the 10 to 20 lakh students that we are estimating have access to it right now. There are 3-4 things that we are planning for the future as well. Because of the momentum that has been created, I think a lot of states have started to buy into the cost effectiveness of scaling up digital infrastructure in the long run. And the utility of that, because of the field stories that we are getting back, the excitement within both teachers and students about being able to access learning in this matter. And the true sort of democratization potential of digital learning, which we're not seeing right now because of the digital divide, but can potentially come because of government investment in the long run, because of success of such interventions, is where I think the long-term success will lie. And that's something which we're working with states to scale up in the next 1 to 2 years, such that the COVID crisis is not just an immediate response, but more of a catalytic effect for long-term change. That's been our experience. And as I said, some of the learnings that have happened hopefully will be useful for our states as well as other states as we go forward.
Thanks so much, Shoikat. And I think the couple of things that really stand out in what you shared, I think one, the focus on teacher training and teacher professional development. I think that's very critical. I think the second thing, even keeping the sort of long-term, medium-term in mind, and not just looking at it as knee-jerk, right, as a COVID response, but some of these pieces could then be part of the steady state even post-COVID. So sorry, we do not have time for questions. I just want to do 2 things. I think one, I believe that a lot of the panelists have been answering a lot of the questions live as well. Second, I just wanted to call out, I went through all the questions, and I think the questions, there are 4 or 5 trends emerging from the question, which I think can be in some sense food for thought, feedback for the panelists and for all other partners working with states. I think the first is, again, there are a lot of questions around the reach, tracking reach, monitoring reach, holding the system accountable. I think second was some questions around integration with the curriculum. How does one ensure that all these different learning capsules through the different channels actually integrate with what children need to learn in every grade? I think third was around accountability of tracking learning outcomes. I think, like we saw in Himachal, we need to continue to track our children actually learning. Fourth, I think is a great call out was how do we empower parents? And I think they're also they've been home with children. How do we give them the tools to also support these children to learn? And finally, I think there was a interesting question around reducing the curriculum. Be pragmatic. We have a shorter academic year sort of coming up. How does one take a pragmatic approach? And I think what Shoikat shared was pretty interesting. Think of remedial in primary and elementary. For senior grades, secondary and higher secondary, actually look at maybe grade level competencies. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists for joining us. And I think it was a very engaging session. And, and thank you for all your work in, ensuring that children during this COVID crisis continue to learn. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vikram.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.